Hello and welcome to ThePrint. This is an exclusive program that has been put together only for our subscribers like you. And thank you so much for subscribing to ThePrint and being part of this print family. And this family is growing. And I'm very glad to see that this family is now much bigger than what we were when we began a few years back. I am Snehesh Alex Philip. I am the deputy editor here. I look after defense. I have with me Praveen Swami, who joined us earlier this week. He is the national security editor. And before I go further, I would like to tell you that viewers, subscribers, that we are now changing the newsroom. And we now have Praveen handling a particular team, particular role. I would ask Praveen to pitch in and tell us more about what's happening at ThePrint.
So first of all, thank you very much. Journalism depends on subscribers like you. And as you know, at ThePrint, journalists like Snehesh, other members of our national security team, travel across the country. They bring you close-up, granular looks at stories that you probably will not find elsewhere in the media. But journalism costs money. And the money comes from subscribers like you. We're deeply grateful again and to people like you for supporting our journalism. And we hope you'll be telling your friends, people you talk to about ThePrint and encouraging them to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As Snehesh said, thank you. We have a new team now with a growing team that's going to be covering not just defense, but international affairs, strategic affairs, the domestic security landscape, the intelligence services, and our regrettably many internal security conflicts. And I hope we'll be bringing you events like this regularly. And look forward to the opportunity to interact with all of you in coming weeks and coming months. Snehesh, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Praveen. So, viewers, as you're aware, there's a huge crisis. There's a huge war which is currently on between Russia and Ukraine. And there are a lot of multiple lessons that militaries across the world are learning and looking at and learning from this particular conflict. And so, this is a new feature that we've started at ThePrint only for our subscribers, wherein we'll try and get you the experts on various subjects. Today we are starting off on a defense issue, but you will have multiple other issues from internal security to politics, to health, and a lot of other genres that we will cover exclusively for subscribers like you. So the topic that we've chosen today in context of the Russia-Ukraine war is the lessons for the Indian Air Force. Now, if you remember when this whole conflict was started by Russia on the 24th of February, they started off with firing multiple missiles into Ukraine, targeting Ukrainian air defenses and the Ukrainian Air Force, the airstrips and all. And this was supposed to be followed by a launch of airstrikes, which the Russians did. They remember that the Russian Air Force is quite huge in comparison to the Ukrainians. They have nearly about 700 aircraft, of which 300 were deployed close to the Ukrainian borders as a show of strength. Now, one would have imagined that Russia would win air superiority or air dominance, and the Ukrainians would eventually, drop in their weapons and surrender. But we now know, over 8 months later, that the fight is still on. And the Russian Air Force, despite its numerically higher numbers, have not been able to establish any kind of air superiority over the Ukrainian airspace. And hence, we have, experts on this particular topic with us to discuss and make you understand exactly what has happened and what are the lessons that the IAF can draw. I have with me Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramaniam. He needs no introduction, but for those in case if you don't know about him, he is a military historian, and he is someone that I always turn to whenever I have any doubts about India's past conflicts wherein the Indian military has taken part, not just the Air Force, mind you. I also have Air Marshal Anil Chopra. He's someone who brought in the first Mirage fighters, first set of Mirage fighters to India way back in 1987, if I'm not mistaken, and is currently the Director General of Center for Air Power Studies. I have also with me Air Marshal Diptendu Chaudhary. Now, he is the former commandant of the NDC, that is the National Defense College. And I have with me Tara Karta, who's the former director of the National Security Council Secretariat. So we have the Air Force as well as the security wing to tell us about what really went wrong and what are the lessons that the IAF can learn. Viewers, subscribers, please do send in your questions. I'll try and take as many questions as possible during this session. So my first question would actually be to Arjun sir. So what happened? Why has the Russian Air Force really failed, or have they failed?
Okay. So what I'll do, Snehesh, is that to understand why what has happened over the air has actually happened, we need to go a little bit into the past. Now, Russian air power doctrine really, if you look at the period from 1945 through the period of the Cold War and then in the post-Cold War era, one doesn't really hear about Russian air power doctrine. One hears about their firepower from the ground. One hears about their maneuver. One hears about their nuclear doctrine. But very rarely over the last 50 years have we heard anything meaningful about Russian air power doctrine. So does that mean Russian air power doctrine has actually been stagnant? My considered opinion is yes. Russian air power doctrine has been stagnant. It has relied very heavily on capability in the form of platforms and engines. It has not invested sufficiently in doctrine, strategy, training, interoperability, and integration. And as a result, gradually over a period of time, I think Western air power doctrine has significantly outpaced Russian air power doctrine. Now, let me give you an example from our own side. Many of our esteemed panelists, both Chow as well as Air Marshal Chopra, have brought in aircraft from the USSR also. Hundreds of our pilots have trained in the USSR, have brought back platforms, right from the MiG-21 to the MiG-23, the 27, a whole lot of platforms. But rarely in my entire 36 years of service do I recollect having practiced Russian air power tactics or talked about air power doctrine in our crew rooms. So what we've actually done in the Air Force, to our credit, is that we've adapted Russian platforms with Western tactics and our own tactics, and that is why Indian air power is where it is today. It's because it has able to adapt and it has been flexible. Unfortunately, Russian air power doctrine has neither been adaptable nor has it been flexible. And many folks will say, but the Russians performed over Syria. But how did they perform? What kind of an environment over Syria? Syria was uncontested airspace. Syria had no problems about collateral damage. They just used a lot of tonnage over territory, and they never really worried about collateral damage. They were effective, no doubt. But Ukraine presented a whole different ball game for the Russians. And I think they've fallen short, significantly short, because they've not been able to achieve air superiority. They've slipped up on areas such as suppression of air defense and destruction of enemy air defense. They've given the Ukrainians freedom to operate unmanned aerial systems. And that are some of the basic issues that have seen Russian air power fall short over Ukraine.
That's a good wrap that you've given me. And when you talk about doctrine, Air Marshal Chaudhary, you've written extensively on the Russian air power doctrine. And also the fact that there have been a number of, the Russia over the past few years have been trying to modernize itself. Now, the Russian Air Force has actually been combined in 2015 with the Russian Space Force. So there have been changes that have been made, but where did the Russians really lack, Air Marshal Chaudhary?
I think Arjun gave some very insights into a bit about the absence of a clear-cut and a sort of a invisible Russian aerospace doctrine. But I have a little different perception of it, because having gone through it extensively, I realized one fact, because the West was very quick to denigrate the Russian approach, use of air power fundamentally. So I delved deeper into it and I realized there are some structural issues here. Russia originally, right from the fundamental earlier World War II days onwards, it had its own air defense forces, which had its own fighters and own aircraft. And that was the PV And so that was mainly for the air defense of the motherland, the deep heartland of Russia. And for its offensive part, which was called the frontal aviation, which was a tactical aviation, that was used extensively simply to support the ground campaign. Now, after the previous Chinese event, there was a VVKO, which was the Aerospace Defense Forces, and finally it all got merged into the Aerospace Force, VKS, which is what it is now. It still has the VVS under it, which is still the frontal aviation. Now, interestingly, Arjun mentioned the Syrian campaign, and but very interesting part is in the Syrian campaign, very swiftly, the Russians, in fact, out of the close to, I think, 70,000 odd sorties have flown, they've had, I think, only one loss to a manpack. That is because the Russian VVS, so the Russian Air Force, was operating independently, and it had the freedom to adapt its tactics. So it stayed out of it did medium altitude missions and didn't have a single stinger loss to manpacks. Whereas the same thing has happened again in Ukraine. So the argument I'm trying to make is that when it comes to the VKS and operating as part of the Russian military whole, it is subordinate to the ground campaign's requirements. And so there's a structural problem here because doctrinally the VKS or the VVS do not have the freedom to carry out air operations independently. And now this brings me to another major point, is that in the Russian context, they don't have the concept of occupying or dominating large swaths of airspace. So the concept of air superiority really is not there in the Russian government. It's only regional and localized to the ground campaign. So this is where the whole challenge has been. So while the West has been quick to say, because seen from a Western perspective, and like Arjun mentioned, it didn't follow up. Like you also opened up when they carried out the initial strikes, it didn't follow through. And in fact, we had some Western analysts who were the people who actually planned the Gulf War, who were very quick to denigrate the Russians, saying that they don't understand air power, and that seems to be a fact. So what emerges is that Russia's understanding of the employment of air power is only it's a sort of a rider to its ground campaign, and that's it. So that explains, I think, most of the challenges.
Absolutely. Both of you spoke about the Russian doctrinal lapses and the limitations of it. Which brings me to this question, Air Marshal Chopra. The fact is that in the Navy there is a concept of sea dominance and then sea denial. The sea dominance is through the aircraft carriers, then the sea denial is through submarines. Now, you have in this particular war, what one sees is obviously a larger force, which would have, got air supremacy or air dominance eventually. But somehow the Ukrainians, which are much smaller force, have been able to deny that supremacy to a much stronger Russian Air Force. So Air Marshal Chopra has this question of, just like sea denial and sea supremacy, is there a thing of air denial and air supremacy now? And how do you see this going forward, sir?
Yeah, Snehesh, I must mention that, I've been writing about this air denial and, sea denial analogy with the air denial. Huge asymmetry between the two air forces. In fact, let me correct your numbers. The second largest and 27th largest air force of the world, 1,700 fighters on one side, 100 fighters only on the other side. In fact, the whole of Ukrainian Air Force has got only 200 aircraft total. So aircraft, of course, similar origin, mostly of the Russian origin, barring after 2015 when they got some Turkish UAVs, but no new fighters came. So that's the kind of difference between the two sides. But the Russians, within the first 3-4 days, told us informally and otherwise that only 300 combat aircraft were deployed in this region out of those 1,700. Why only 300? Because they were worried that NATO might expand the war. And so this was the issue as far as They did strike military infrastructure in Ukraine's air bases. They flew SIAD missions. Whether they're successful or not, we got only one-sided view. That was from the Western media, because there was nobody. The media which was sitting in Ukraine was not Russian media, but obviously they were the media of the rest of the world. But Russians never went for air superiority. Some Western analysts in the last few days have brought out this, that there was no need for either side to have air superiority at all. They said that there was a need for air denial. And now this is in this conflict situation, Russians have managed that. No Ukrainian aircraft, barring the first 2 weeks when both sides shot each other's aircraft. Some of the top pilots from both sides got shot up, who were very famous otherwise. There has been no air activity of any significance. And that means both sides achieved air denial. How? The Ukrainians manage air denial by having these shoulder fights, the 1,000 plus stringers that they got from the West, from the Americans. So they manage, these could be hidden. There was nothing to jam. There was nothing to do a SIAD on these. So initial SIAD campaign did succeed, but the air denial part now, there was no aircraft that Ukraine could have flown, because nearly 50 aircraft were destroyed on the ground. The Ukrainian Air Force had moved the remaining aeroplanes away to the west. So as far as the Ukrainian Air Force is concerned, they had nothing to fly. The only thing they had to defend. And so they were defending, and they were trying to do air denial. Similarly, Russians realized that they're not going to get a bomber, expensive bomber here over this area and then get shot up with a air defense weapon. So they did not want. So they used expensive standoff weapons. Very rarely they used the iron bombs, or mainly to conserve some expensive PGM. That's what they did. Even the hypersonic weapon that they used were from very far away. Whether those 3 hypersonic missiles that they used, were they on correct targets? They could have used a much cheaper alternate ballistic missile to do that, or a normal cruise missile might have done that damage, is still being questioned. So the point I'm making is that the issue about now, as far as the UAVs are concerned, what has happened is the initial days we saw that UAVs quickly targeted the tanks from the top, and all kinds of kamikaze drones were fired. But subsequently, UAVs have got shot up. We know that today the figures are the current figures, which are in open media, about 50 UAVs of the Ukrainians have got, but nearly 50 of the Russians have also shot. No, not very many people know that Russians have also used the Orion UAVs, some variants of the Orion UAVs. So this is the situation. It is a situation of air denial. Russians don't want to lose expensive aeroplanes. Ukrainians have got nothing to fly. So therefore, other than UAVs, the Russian SIAD campaign beyond this was not required, other than the air denial they have achieved. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that the Russians never really wanted to go in for air supremacy.
No, they had achieved what they wanted. You see, once the Ukrainian Air Force is grounded, either because of 40-50 aircraft got shot up, few got shot up in the air, because the air-to-air engagements took place only the first 2 weeks. Yeah. After that, and the remaining nearly I think around 40 aircraft got shot up on the ground. The remaining fighters were moved away. So both sides have had a similar set of losses, 50-50 each, as far as the aircraft are concerned. The number of UAVs both sides have lost, the figures are more or less matching and similar. And the advantage that the Ukrainians have had is the shoulder-fired and the other air defense weapons, which have kept the Russian Air Force a little far away, and mainly because of the manpad. So this is what I call air denial, and that has been the strategy. The Russian campaign after 2 weeks, so there was no more a SIAD. There was no requirement thereafter of SIAD. Okay.
So, perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Ms. Tarakarta, when you look at it, you are looking at it from a completely non-defense background. You were part of the NCCS. So when you look at it, what do you see? What do you observe? Especially when it comes to the use of the air power. How do you see the Russian use of the air power? And do you think, if tomorrow India is in a similar situation, India uses a lot many Russian aircraft. Actually, the majority of our fighter force is actually Russians, because we have about 260 of Sukhois. We have 3 squadrons of the MiG-21 Bisons, which are still there. regretfully. And then we also have, 6 squadrons of the MiG-29s, which are upgraded. So how do you see this, Ms. Kartar?
I see this slightly differently. Like I said, I'm not a Russian war expert. There are no Russian doctrine, but other than that, I'm not a flyer. See, overall in our decision-making system, and I'm not being specific, there has been a reluctance to use air power. Even when you commit in limited numbers. Because you have enemies not just on the west, you've got enemies on the east also. So my assumption is Russia also had the same reservation. We are really terribly hamstrung, as someone else said, by the fact that we have no information. The whole thing is one-sided, and Russians amazingly are not giving out any data from the beginning. They just haven't made use of this. So that is one issue I have. That when you have air assets, the problem is that when an aircraft gets shot down, then A, it's so terribly expensive. B, it's a huge psychological campaign. It's a huge psychological adverse thing against you. Second thing is the nuclear dimension. Snehesh, if you look at the strikes, you will find even the artillery strikes by the Ukrainians are within their own territory. They are not hitting Russian territory. Russians in the same way will fly up they will hit that Lviv, which is right near the border, but not extra. NATO aircraft are flying along the border, very carefully picking up intelligence, imagery, everything. Nobody is going in. So it's a very, very calculated move to keep this. Everyone's terrified that the Third World War will break out. So that, to my mind, is also an important factor. And also, I had mapped all the nuclear statements these people have made. Russia has been trying desperately to invoke nuclear deterrence. The US is not buying it. So there are some very, you can sort of call this a proxy plus war. So in that sense, as other proxy wars we've seen, air power has a limited role. So I'll stop there.
That's a very interesting angle that you brought in. I'm so glad that we have you here. And that is the reason why we have her here, because she can bring in an angle which we tend to overlook because we're too focused on the tactical and the strategic aspect of it. And plus, it's an ongoing war. So, AVM Subramanian sir, just, I would like to bring you here. She spoke about the limitations of the air power. There have been, and we've seen the increasing case of manpads, the S-300 air defense systems that are there, which has really limited the role of the Russian Air Force. Do you see this war? There are many experts who've said that warships, tanks, and fighters, are now expensive items, and this war really proves that. That wars can be fought, won, or delayed, even with cheaper acquisitions, with cheaper modern systems like the drones. So AVM Subramanian, do you think that the prominence of the air power has reduced? The traditional air power has reduced?
Absolutely, absolutely not. In fact, before I buttress my argument with why I feel that, if anything, the importance of the importance of air power in escalation control, the importance of air power of making an impact and conflict termination without committing too many ground troops and suffering too much of attrition. All the more reason why today we need to relook at. But before I go, I'd like to sort of build on something that Tara mentioned, and that is about escalation dynamics. You see, I have maintained in all my writing that the Indian strategic community does not understand air power sufficiently and adequately. We have primarily been a continental focused and a continental minded country. We now are attempting to shift our focus to the maritime domain. But I'm afraid that, on this, the 90th anniversary of the Indian Air Force, I think we are not sufficiently air minded. We always think of air power as being escalatory. I will offer a contrarian opinion. I will offer several examples wherein air power has actually been de-escalatory in its impact. For example, let's look at Kargil. Air power was applied, albeit a little late. It was suboptimal initially. It picked up momentum. And nobody other than General Malik has said that in case air power had not come in, probably the conflict would have dragged on for another month. So I will argue, in Kargil, was air power escalatory or did it contribute to de-escalation? Let's look at the escalatory dimension which we've managed to address with Balakot. Look, I think what happened at Balakot was that the Indian strategic establishment crossed a Lakshman Rekha, which said that we will use air power for coercion, and we are quite confident that it will not escalate beyond the point that we cannot handle it. And ultimately, after Balakot, we haven't seen a significant Jaish or a Lashkar strike within India. So there is some amount of pain that was inflicted. Now coming to Russia. Now, you see, the thing is that Russia, the overwhelming superiority that Russia enjoys, it should have actually exploited air power in missions that could have led to conflict termination in the kind of time frame that they expected. Russia has the kind of air power assets, it has the kind of intent to be able to follow through with driving a conflict termination, but it has not been able to do that because it has not used air power in the manner in which air power is meant to be used. Neither did Russia use air power sequentially, nor did it use it parallelly. When I talk about sequentially, Russian air power did come into action in the initial days of the war, okay? But after that, it did not follow up sufficiently on suppression of enemy air defenses. Don't tell me that the Russians haven't been hunting for Zelensky. But but do they have the capability from the air to take out Zelensky? No, they don't. Air Marshal Chopra talked about anti-radiation. He talked about suppression of enemy air defenses. Now, Russian capability in suppression of enemy air defenses is extremely suspect. They have a missile called the KH-31, which is not proven to be extremely effective in standoff suppression of enemy air defenses. Air Marshal Chopra talked about air denial. If air denial had been so successful, how come the Barkatyar and the other smaller unmanned aerial systems from the Ukrainian Air Force managed to take out so many tanks? So, while I would agree with Air Marshal Chopra that there has been restraint and that they are not able to, like Tarak also mentioned, they are not able to figure out where is the escalation point. And that is why probably Russian air power is being restrained. But I think there is also a significant amount of diffidence on the part of Russian air power because I don't think they are trained sufficient. I don't think they have trained sufficiently in the past few years. Statistics say that Russian pilots on the average train 80 to 100 hours in a year, right? The average in most of the other developed air forces is anywhere between 150 to 200 hours. So I think there are serious issues with Russian air power, notwithstanding whatever has been discussed.
Well, that's a very interesting point. I can see Air Marshal Anil Chopra really wanting to come in, and please join in.
No. We're not going to. So with my Scotland boy, we're not going to get into a one versus one here. Not at all.
Yes.
I tend to agree with Tara when she said that we've heard only the Western side of the story. I personally feel that air power has been adequately used by the Russian. I will again substantiate in a few through some few different other examples. We talk about TB2s. TB2s were affected for 10 days maximum. In a contested environment in the world today, a TB2 class of UAV cannot sustain. What can sustain is kamikaze drone. What can sustain is the drones which went and hit the tanks from the top. We can say cruise missiles can sustain. But UAV of larger size of TB2 and bigger, whether it was the Russian or this, cannot survive the war, and they did not. After 3 days, I would say about 10 days, you stopped hearing about TB2s altogether. No, now let us. I think it's better we talk about the more lessons that have come out. The UAVs, smaller UAVs, very effective. Larger ones in contested, not working. Man-pads doing a great job, easy to camouflage, easy to hide. But if you were to fly aeroplanes very high, the Russians could not fly very high because S-300 was still there. So therefore, yes, S-300 was not fully neutralized. I accept that part of the CID was not complete. The vulnerability of a tank to the top, munitions, very high. Helicopters, gunships are highly vulnerable to man-pads unless they use IR flare, which in some cases, even the Russians did not use IR flares because they are the only ones who are flying. Cruise missiles are very effective. They have even exposed the vulnerability of large ships. They just fired 2 cruise missiles, but in actual case, you could have had much larger number of cruise missiles being fired. As Tara said, that no target and I totally agree with her, in Russia has been hit. Nobody can dare to hit them. The moment they hit, of course, then escalate to de-escalate, nuclear words were brought in. We did not see any stealth aircraft which got used because perhaps Russians didn't need to send a stealth aircraft because there was nothing the other side was going to catch in any way. So perhaps it was not required. Whether cyber warfare, electronic warfare were used, there is a general feeling that they perhaps were underutilized. That's what most of the analysts are saying, that the Russians who were very good at cyber when they did it in Crimea, they perhaps had not used enough cyber. Maybe because the entire world's media is controlled by the West. The internet, the social media platforms, everything is controlled by the West. And the entire media was sitting only on the side where the West wanted them to sit. So that these are separate issues. Electronic warfare, we are not sure. I think only after some time, much later, we'll be able to analyze whether the electronic warfare worked or not. Yes, Ukrainian populations, whatever videos we saw, they all came from the Ukrainian side. Their psychological warfare was very effective. The Ukrainians were highly motivated. Their leadership was motivated. They were pushing hard. They had the great support from the West for information warfare, from ISR. As Tara said, the aeroplanes were flying along the border and all kinds of information was being fed. So the air defense is, extremely effective. Logistics is an issue. The anti-logistics operations that were done from the air, they are very effective. They're going to be very important for us, especially since we might have to fight wars in the mountains. There will be risk to logistic movements. But on the other side, we could be doing the same thing. Autonomous drones are going to be very powerful tool. And as I said, that losses of skilled personnel in warfare is a difficult area. Now, the Russians have not been able, they have reached a point that they have to enroll fresh people. They're not finding young people. Now, I met the ambassador from one of the CIS countries from Central Asia this morning. And you know what he told me? He said that in the Russian military, most of the people who were enrolled were either from Central Asian countries or from Ukraine. And now, since those two areas are not with the, it was the case in the time of Soviet Union, those areas are not there with them. Therefore, the Russians are finding it extremely difficult to get, people over here. We will talk of more lessons as we go along, but I think I'll rest my case for the time being, at least. Yeah.
That was a really good wrap of multiple lessons that we learned from this particular conflict. So viewers, as you can see, we have the experts here. The forum is open. Do send in your questions. I've already started receiving tons of questions. I also have viewers who've sent in questions in advance. And these are about 8 pages of questions that are there. So I'm going to really pick on your brains, the experts. So the first question, and multiple questions have been asked on this, and I'll come to Air Marshal Chaudhary on this. So many are, this particular conflict has brought out the limitations of the Russian Air Force fighter tech also, in terms of standoff weapons, in terms of electronic warfare. There are multiple questions that have been, that really have come out. So there are multiple questions on this particular subject itself, that the Indian Air Force uses so much of the Russian equipment. Is it time for us to move away from the Russian equipment? We already have moved away. We've taken a very conscious decision. For example, let's say we have 260 of the Sukhois. when the next day after Balakot strike, we had two Sukhois, Su-30 MKIs who were on a combat air patrol, and they were challenged by the F-16s. They were completely outmatched because the Sukhois use the same air-to-air missile that the obsolete MiG-21 uses, right? So is there a need to upgrade the weaponry of the Russian aircraft that we have, especially the Su-30s? And is there a need to move away to more modern fighters?
Okay, it's a very interesting question and it's very pertinent. But before I jump into that, I'd just like to bring out one aspect I think which probably needs mentioning. The two air forces are entirely disparately matched as far as the Russians and the Ukrainians are concerned. But what is more important, because ultimately this is all about lessons for the Indian Air Force. We have two adversaries with strong air forces. One is a near-peer air force and one is a stronger, it's a larger air force. So this is something, of late in the writings in the military domain and the strategic domain, there's a lot of argument on the need for air superiority. But ironically, people miss out the fact in the absence that with two strong air forces, you cannot expect surface operations to go, uninterfered and unopposed by the enemy air forces. So the need for a strong air force and the need for air power, which Arjun had mentioned, if anything, is going to get stronger. Because at the end of the day, the terrain friction, the old concepts of capturing large swaths of territory is no longer sort of feasible in the northern borders and in the eastern borders. So that brings in a different dynamics. And logistics was mentioned by Air Marshal Chopra. If you don't cut off the logistics chains of your adversaries, how do you do that? You can only do that effectively in the mountains with air power. So the problem essentially lies in the fact that in 2010, the Russian Air Force was actually brought under, all the air forces were brought under what was called the Operational Strategic Command, which was the earlier theater, the military theater. So they was brought under the OSK. So it became a subset of the OSK. And what has come out very clearly is the inability, and incidentally, the Russian aerospace forces are being led by a career army general. So the point comes out very clearly, understanding of air power, and this is something which is very, very important. It's a very difficult subject to understand. And the fact that it was subordinated to the army and it was wedded to the campaign, it obviously took away all thought and imagination of using it more effectively, which the Russians could have done. Now I bring you back to the fact of technology. I mean, in my service career itself, we have shifted from gun combats to close combat missiles, active BVRs. So my argument is the Indian Air Force has rapidly kept pace with technological changes over the years, which we have done. You mentioned the missile asymmetry in post-Balakot, but look at the other way around. Arjun mentioned Kargil. The reason Pakistani Air Force, which was deployed across in Skardu, didn't do anything, frankly, because the BVR asymmetry was in our advantage.
Exactly.
Which was lost over a period of time. So the point is, if you don't keep pace with technology, upgrading your missiles and your radar systems and weaponry, it's not so much really just the platform. So it's moment technology comes in, ranges, capabilities, jam resistance systems, more effective systems which can penetrate adversarial interference. It makes a huge difference to technological changes in air power. And with that, the Indian Air Force has consistently adapted its doctrines. We had a doctrine in first doctrine came out in 2000. In 2010, we revised the doctrine, and we have just gone and revised the doctrine again. Now, this most people don't know. So the fact is, with the technological changes, Indian Air Force also adapts its tactics, its strategies, its concepts of operations with these improved capabilities of weapon systems. So this becomes a challenge with the Army and the Navy, because there the concepts pretty much have remained the same. With changes are less rapid. So this makes it a very difficult aspect to understand. From the perspective of the Russian equipment per se, yes, there are limitations, but the fact of it is, I would think, with the present, in fact, recently the Astra, the latest version is fired, which has a much better range than adversary. So here it automatically brings, so there's a constant, sort of sine curve of capabilities. So unless you stay ahead of these capabilities in terms of technological adaptations of your weapon systems and aircraft systems, it becomes a challenge. So Air Force is very alive to that. The issue is obviously the budgetary requirements bring in, the focus, the numbers are an issue. So it becomes a huge challenge on where do you want to concentrate your monies for the next financial year. And because you understand, it all takes time to sort of come in. From the time you invest in a project and the time it gets operationalized and used on the front line, it takes a fair amount of time. So I think the Indian Air Force is pretty agile in terms of keeping up with technology, changes in doctrinal aspects, in its warfighting concept. But the issue will always remain the budgetary constraints.
Okay, perfect. We have a question coming in from Srinidhi Rao, and there's a very important question, very timely question. And she's asking, will theater commands make the collective impact more effective of a strike force? And theater command is a very sensitive, theaterization is a very sensitive issue. We just had earlier this week, the Air Force chief talking about the theater command and the concerns that the Air Force has when it comes to structures. Now, we had, Air Marshal AVM Subramanian sir talking about the fact that people don't really understand the air power. So would, and I'll give, I'll ask AVM Subramanian sir to answer this. Would theater command really solve a lot of issues that have been spoken about here about the need for separate fighting? You will have a cohesive fighting force, or does the Air Force have a different view on this?
The day after the CDS, the new CDS took office, I'd written a piece in the Indian Express in which wished him well and listed out the various challenges that the CDS has. Now, to my mind, the biggest challenge that the CDS has is not one of hastening the incorporation of theater commands. I think the biggest challenge that he has, number one, is to act as a bridge between the political establishment, which is in a hurry to transform, and rightly so, and the Indian armed forces as large organizations, which are always reluctant to transform, reluctant to change, reluctant to integrate. So that is one big problem. The second issue, and look, I'm not going to put my hand on theater commands. I'm not going to say whether theater commands need to come up now or whether they need to come up 5 years down the line. I have always been an advocate of integration. Now, integration is extremely important. How do you ensure that a country like India, which has serious limitations of budget, whose principal outcome is development, how do you integrate fighting capabilities in order to prove to be an effective instrument, right? So my sense is that we need to integrate better. We need to get joint rather than joined before we sort of step on the pedal when it comes to theaterization. So the Air Force has repeatedly said it, and successive chiefs have mentioned that the Air Force is not opposed to theaterization, but it has serious reservations about theaterization in its current flavor or in its current trajectory, right?
Okay, perfect. My apologies to Srinidhi Rao. I referred to him as she. He's just messaged saying that it's not she, he. Chota bhai maan ke maaf kar dena. Multiple viewers have actually sent in questions. For example, Kaustubh Savkar. You also have Aditya Chandra. You also have Sanat Sunil. You also have Karthikeyan and many others who are talking about whether India needs to focus more on drones. The drone warfare is what really lies ahead. You of course had Air Marshal Chopra talking about the fact that the bigger drones have not really been successful in a contested airspace. The Russian, what happened in Syria was different. What happened in Afghanistan was different because they were not really contested airspace per se. But then you also have the fact is that the drone warfare is the future. When it comes to swarm drones, when it comes to, let's say, even not drones, loitering munitions, are key. So is this an area that really needs to be focused on? Air Marshal Chopra.
Yeah, let me, before I come to the drone, which certainly I will, I want to, do some value addition to the 2-3 points that got spoken earlier, because I was in Russia for nearly 4.5 years on an upgrade program. Of course, that was the time when the things were not so good for Russia because they had just broken up just a decade earlier. But I want to tell you that Russia for last nearly 20 years not been able to invest very much in aircraft technology. So therefore, we tried to join up with them in the FGFA program, the fifth generation. We know 57 is flying, but numbers are only 14 aircraft are flying in till today. They have not been able to invest. So therefore, despite they having outstanding aeroplanes during the Soviet Union time, in the last 2-3 decades, their investments in aircraft have been on the lower side. And therefore, today, most Western countries and their technologies are ahead of the Russians. In fact, Chinese are catching up with the West, but Russians are not. So this is one. Second thing about what happened after Balakot is, yes, for a short while, we always used to have the BVR advantage for decades. Then all of a sudden, the Americans gave AMRAAMs for the F-16, which are not supposed to be used against us. But they got them, and therefore, for a short while, there was a dichotomy between us and them. But then the Rafale came, and Meteor has come, and therefore that imbalance has, I hope, has got resolved. Whether we should be buying modern Western fighters, we should continue in Russia. My position has been very clear. We are already 60% the Russian Air Force. The basket is too heavy. We have to get out of this large numbers. My personal take is that, of course, ultimately we should have about 40% Indian, 30%, each of the West and the Russians, because we cannot get out of Russian basket for a long time to come. So therefore, there is the need for indigenization, and there I am very, very proud that the country from the top to bottom, everybody is now going full bore on indigenization. Air superiority, not possibility in India and Pakistan in full sense. It is not Bangladesh war. We are going to have air superiority for time and space, for short areas, and that will depend on how the battles elsewhere are being fought. What we certainly need is, there are many analysts who are saying that 42 squadrons is too much. Why are you asking when you have Rafale class of aeroplanes? But I must tell you that if the Chinese are going to have 200 J-20s, they're going to have 80 plus squadrons China is going to have. In Pakistan, the air chief told us just a few days back is going up from their 19 fighter squadrons to 22. If they all are going to have numbers, they are all going to have, they will keep buying J-10s, and we'll continue to have, less. So it is not practical, and one has to be honest on it. Two areas that Indian Air Force needs very, very badly, these are force multipliers. The FRAs, we have got only 6 FRAs, out of which any given time will be 4 or 5 will be serviceable. 2 inadequate for a continental size Air Force country that we are. And similarly, to have 3 large and 3 small AEWCs, 2 inadequate. Pakistan has got more AEWCs than us. Their levels may be slightly different. So the point I'm making is that there is a need to, and one small point on your theater, this thing, there is no reluctance to integrate. There is no reluctance to jointness. But there are issues about theater command, which the air chief himself has said. So therefore, this panel is perhaps not the appropriate place. Drones, we require it. In the last 2 years, the level and scale at which we have had drone events attended by the Prime Minister, Drone Mahotsav, Drone Federation of India has organized 2 huge events, one last year, one this year, and the next year is in 2023, a huge drone event. I have met a large number. We ourselves in Center for Air Pass Studies carried out a UAV-based, event, and we met a large number of startups, and I am telling you, the mood is very positive. I only hope the country really pushes. We need not only drones and drone swarms, anti-drone technologies. We need also to build up our armament stocks. We are already on the job. The number of cruise missiles we will require will be much larger, and other armaments, because wars are not going to be short and sweet. We have seen it in Ukraine. And it will not be so short and sweet elsewhere also, I think so. Yes.
That's a very interesting point that you mentioned. And this is something, the questions that have been asked by viewers, including Suchet, Raghav, Pratibha, is something that they're asking is, and this question is actually goes to Ms. Tarakarta. The fact is that, the Russian war has been a long war. It was, everybody initially when the war started, everybody thought it's going to be short, it's going to be quick. But this war has really lasted so long. The Russians had, they fired so many missiles into Ukraine, but they still haven't been able to win the war. The fact is that tomorrow, if we have a war possibly with Pakistan, for which, I had interviewed the former CDS, in which he had mentioned that we have built up our reserves for 10 days war with Pakistan. We're building up a reserve for a 30-day possible war with China. But given the budget, given the requirements, given the fact that you can't have so many stockpiles of systems with us, how does this really work? Can India really afford to have, or does India really have systems in place to have such stockpiles? The Russians are facing a resource crunch now with the missiles and all, and they've stopped firing these high-end missiles because they're worried that in case something happens with NATO, then they wouldn't be left with anything at all.
So one of the basic, foundation or structural is a criteria on which we need to put this debate on, when very rightly raised, is budgetary constraints. There's no money, honey. That's the basic line. And I, at one level, love the fact that, our brave Air Force people and Army people will say, we'll do whatever we can, no matter what the budget. The fact is, you can't. Someone has to stand up and say, listen, boss, we don't have the money to do what you're asking us to do. If a political leader says, go across and go and do this, go and sort out Pakistan, he'll say, sorry, paise nahi hai. Now, who has the guts to do that? Now, coming back to something else is, in fact, by the way, there was, if you remember, when Obama did this shift, this pivot to Asia.
The rebalance.
Yeah, the DOT brought out a paper saying, sorry, now we were foregoing this particular tasking. We are only going to be able to do this because you want us to pivot, we can't do everything. So that's the kind of thinking you need to do, one. Number two is, let's put this in context. You are not going to go and start occupying POK or some other place, or you will have at the most short border kind of, where you go across, you grab, you come back, they will do something, you do something. That is Pakistan. China, frankly, I don't know what these guys will do. There are better experts, far better experts than me. Now, having said that, since there is no money and you're not going to have even less in future, it's going to be even less. Theater command, I think everybody kind of diplomatically dodged that question. What I'm saying is not theater, it is domain. You have to be domain agnostic in the sense you have to say, I have to get this job done. Say, I have to blow up X place. Use air, you can use sea, you can use land, you can use special forces. You use anything and a combined thing and then get the job done. So with due respect to the Air Force veterans who are like majorly fantastic people, forget air power. Just think of power. What do we need to do this task? What is it that we need to do? Can you go and occupy POK? No. Are you going to go and grab, say, bomb the hell out of Beijing? No. You're not even going to bomb Tibet. So let's circumscribe what you need. They know far more than I do. That is where drones come in. Because drones, I can mass produce. I completely agree with what the previous person had said. Drone, I'll tell you, I have seen in meetings, a political leader will ask you, Acha, हमने aircraft भेज दिया तो अगर one guy gets shot down, then what's going to happen? Do you think, how many people do you think will lose? These are the questions a politician will ask. And if you say, I'm sorry, I will send across 10, maybe 5 will come back, he'll say, sorry, ye nahi karna hai. Whereas if you can send in 500 drones and you say, okay, something is lost, it's okay. It will not do the same damage as an aircraft. It doesn't have the same flexibility as an aircraft. It doesn't have the same intelligence as an aircraft. But that is doable. And in the present budget constraints, in the present war scenario, in the kind of adversary you face, they are also not going to attack and grab your territory. We are a nuclear power. The Chinese understand that. They are not going to walk in and grab something. It's not going to happen. Here, it is Russia is a nuclear power, but Ukraine is not. But Ukraine is being armed by a nuclear power. So you see, that's why I said it's a proxy plus war. It's very different from what we are going to face. I think I put enough stuff on the table, so I'll just keep quiet.
No, I'll agree with you completely on that. The fact is that there is limited amount of money that is available for modernization. Sadly, so. Because every wing of the government wants money. At the end of the day, the bank is only this much. And whenever I speak to people in the government, they say we've got 100 rupees. We need to give it to the army, the air force, the navy, the education sector, the social sector. There are multiple things that so it all depends on where exactly does the money really go into. There is a question that has been asked from Vedavti Vipin, and the question is that the Russians had planned to take out Ukrainian communication by destroying the terrestrial infrastructure. But however, you had this, the satellites being used for communication, the SpaceX, so how does really this new age technology really come into play? How much has been the intelligence gathered through satellite? From up there. Which gave information of every single Russian movement that was happening. It was not the Ukrainians who were fighting the Russians. It was a combination of Ukraine, the Americans, the French, the Germans, the British, who all came together and really standing right there behind the Ukrainians with the entire intelligence infrastructure. So how important, is this new age technology and how important is information now? Hey, Marshal Chaudhary, you also wanted to say something because I saw you raising your hand.
Ever since the PLA brought in this, strategic support force, which it created in 2015 December, it was bringing space-enabled capabilities into warfare. What they call the informationatized warfare. That's a very exotic term, very difficult to use in common usage. But it will play a huge role. But, so what most people don't realize that in an Indian air power, the amount of network centricity which already exists in a huge manner is something which makes it a very different kind of a setup from what most people associate air power with. Now, for example, without getting into this theater command issue, but I'll just simply put it this way. The Army's expectations of air power is simply at a tactical level in the front edges. Okay, now whether you want to fight a short war or a long war, whatever it be, the fact is you can't wish away a long war in our contest, how much ever we use. But in either case, air power will play a huge role. And if you see, unfortunately in our history, and I think Arjun will back me on that, except for 71, we have never leveraged air power fully in its entirety for its offensive use. Even in Kargil, we were restrained. It was purely to assist the army. It had just two roles: air defense to make sure the adversary doesn't come across, and our surface options go through, and a lot of interdiction. In fact, there was hardly any close air support to say, which the army always yearns for. But what has been lost, I think, because 71 was 50 years ago, I think it's gone away from a national memory that Indian air power has a strategic role to play. Offensive depth targeting. Unless you target, I have a slight disagreement on this drone issue. Drones don't give you depth, and drones will not produce outcomes. They are not the game changers they're made out to be. They will most certainly have a lot of multiplicity of users, but they will not win you the war. So this is an understanding which most people need to get. In fact, in higher altitudes, they're going to be extremely difficult to operate. The kind which we have on the terrain, which we have in the Himalayas, people don't realize that. that the weather conditions are there are such that the drones may not be as effective as we think it to be. Yes, it's a new aspect. We've had loiter munitions in Indian Air Force for a very long time. People don't realize that. So Air Force has been ahead of it. But my argument is only one, that today, unless and until you look at the larger role of air power, which plays, that is the offensive role of depth targeting. And that is what will bring you outcomes. That is what will force the adversary to change his decisions during operations. That is what will probably bring in political decisions thereafter, policy changes thereafter. So unless and until, but what has happened is that Air Force, in fact, very interestingly, Indian Air Force, not any Air Force for that matter, fights the Air Force, adversaries Air Force, fights the adversary's army, and fights the adversary's navy. Whereas when we look at theaterization model, they are only looking at each service-specific interest which air power provides them, which is a very narrow, it's one of the many tasks which the Air Force has. And that is the fundamental premise and the challenge, which I think in theater command argument keeps coming up. And when it comes to communications and networking, it will most certainly play a huge role. In fact, what we have not touched the topic upon is the integrated air defense systems. The A2AD, which is anti-access, anti-area denial, which is there, which was there over Europe, which is there over the South and East China Seas. In our context as well, with the S-400s, it enables you to dominate adversarial airspaces in a manner which we couldn't do earlier. So the point is integrating the IA, the integrated air defense system, into the networking so that you have the adversarial, your target pictures and everything available in the cockpit, and the whole thing is under an extended umbrella of offensive air defense, if I may put it, because air defense has become a very limited construct, the word understanding of it. But in this larger construct, networking, space-based efforts, and most importantly, ISR will play a huge role. And that is something we terribly lack in, is persistent stare over adversarial spaces. And that is something, persistent stares means from the satellites to have a continuous real-time imagery of your areas of interest. And that is something we lack terribly. So that is a capability which we really, really need to invest, because that will impact all the services and all our future operations.
Well, thank you so much for that. So we have a question coming in from Devesh Singh Rathore. And he says, since we noticed manpads and mobile anti-air being lethal to Russian helicopters, should it be of concern for us regarding the recent induction of the LCH into the Air Force? Now, this is a question that actually, there are multiple questions on the same about the LCH, on the way that the helicopters really have functioned. You know, for some strange reason, the Russians doesn't seem to have learned from what happened in Afghanistan, where they lost N number of helicopters to Stinger missiles, and they've deployed the same set of helicopters here in Ukraine, and they've been shot down by the Stingers and others. So, Air Marshal Chopra, you know, you head the Center for Air Power Studies, and now we have this induction of the LCH, which has taken place both in the Army and the Air Force. How do you see the role of attack helicopters? You know, attack helicopters were primarily, when they brought in, it was to support the ground forces, the tank maneuvers and all. But in this age of manpads, in this age of, Stinger missiles and other such systems, how do you see attack helicopters? Is India doing the right thing by investing so much in attack helicopters?
I must tell you, because I've been on this TV channel for during this LCH ceremony on many channels, and I think it's important for everybody to understand. The general perception is that attack helicopter is only for anti-tank or infantry, anti-infantry role. No, actually, attack helicopters got many roles. We are going to knock off the frontier radars. We're going to knock off, the front defenses. We are going to knock off the. Even we'll take on the first frontier airfield, some infrastructure. That's the kind. Attack helicopter has got a CSR role, that is combat search and rescue role. Attack helicopters today have got, including LCH, has got air-to-air missile. It will be used for anti-attack helicopter role. It will be used anti-UAV role. It will be used for. There are a whole heap of roles that the attack helicopter, LCH especially, I'm talking about. Yes, we learned the hard way in Kargil. We had one helicopter lost because it came within the manpad range. There were 4 of them, all 4, 3 of them used flares. None of them got shot up. The 4th one had unserviceable flares. So therefore, he got shot up. So therefore, we have become conscious. We didn't lose any helicopter thereafter throughout the Kargil war. Not because we didn't fly them low, but we had become conscious. So therefore, in our Indian Air Force's plans, it is very well factored. The LCH is going to be used. This is an aircraft specially designed to fly above 21,000 feet. That is for Himalayan heights. It has already landed in Siachen Glacier with load. So those facts and figures are in the open. So my contention is we are conscious. The whole world is conscious. Yes, not only that, LCH will be, because they'll be on, mountain tops, there will be somebody sitting with a Stinger. So you will have to cater for that. Flare will, it has got a missile warning receiver. It's got a laser warning receiver. It has got everything, so it has got, and of course, RWR. So my contention is the attack helicopter has got its role. It is going to be there. It's not army specific. It is all the 3 services require it. We got the Apaches first. The army required it. They will get 6 more of them. Today, the LCH, the numbers that we have ordered is half of what the Indian Army has ordered. So we have ordered some 60 odd and they have ordered close to 140. Well, fair enough. Each service has got its budget. They will decide how much they need. So the point I'm making is LCH is powerful. Combat helicopters are being used in Ukraine. Some mistakes were made. We all saw that video which went viral. The Russians had not used the flare. The aircraft got shot up with. So that kind of a thing will happen. There will be sort of mistakes made, but LCH is very much there. 1 or 2 small points, if you'll allow me. The ISR thing that Marshal Chaudhary said is very, very relevant. The revisit time. See the number of satellites this year, 60 launches by the Chinese this year. We have launched 3 rockets till now for the year. The 60 launches are more than whole of Europe and America put together. That is the numbers that we are looking at. They are launching these triplets, a constellation of triplets, which is going to cover the entire Ladakh-Tibet area. So we need, I agree totally with the other 2 speakers, both Chao and Arjun Subramaniam, that we require ISR. But another thing that we also require is this communication cyber jamming. We have to cover some distance because this is going to be important. Whether what kind of jamming you're doing today, we're going to use laser jamming in the long term. You require directed energy weapons. You require you required. And one small last point I want to tell you is because I don't want the country to get demoralized that we are very badly off with China. I think we are not so badly off. One, we all know the advantage of the airfield. They've got about 11 of them. 4 of them are clustered near Ladakh. 7 of them are in Tibet. They're all dual use, all are 10,000 above, barring 2 which are at 5,000 feet, all above 10,000 feet. We have got 25 airfields and more, which are at a similar distance, but lying in the plains at heights of 2,000. So we have advantage. The number of missions Indian Air Force will be able to launch, if we put in all our assets, will be 3 times the number of missions the Chinese will be able to launch, I can tell you, and with a reasonable amount of load. And similarly, Indian Army presently, nearly 300,000 are sitting on China border. There are only 100,000, which is Chinese figures, I'm telling you, in Tibet and Xinjiang. I'm not taking the rest of the Western Theater Command because those guys are sitting a little far behind. And for them to mobilize, it's going to be very difficult. They're going to get to mobilize. We will do interdiction. And that's why Indian Air Force will come in a huge way. They've got X number of highways. We're going to create landslides by hitting the sides of the mountains. We are very pretty. If we take off 2 of the Chinese airfields and they take off 6 of ours, we are still better off them. So I want to assure you that, yes, we are in a plan B. The chiefs have now said we are not going to fight a 2-front war, but we are going to fight a 3-front war. It's not possible from us to move from east to west and west to east our troops when the war starts. It will be a very difficult exercise. So now everybody is talking 3-front war, but that's what it is. But I agree with Tara that you can't leave it to us to be on plan B because plan B is not what any country should be working on. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. One drawback of having so many wonderful experts here is that you end up talking to them, listening to them, forgetting that you already overshot the time. My colleague here, Suchet Veer Singh, he tells me that we've already shot the 1 hour mark. So my last question to you on behalf of all the subscribers is, so two things, and this for the entire panelist, two things that the Indian Air Force probably needs to change given the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I'll ask Ms. Tara Karta to go first because she's already getting late is what I'm told. Ma'am, two things that you think that the Indian Air Force should change, or maybe if you don't feel that there's nothing to be changed, then that's also absolutely fine.
I said, for once, you should have put that ladies first aside because I don't like that question. Okay, no, I think I'll be very presumptuous of me to tell the Air Force what they should do. But I just wanted to sort of, again, all of them have talk of BVR, longer range weapons, for what? Why? Because you can't cross the border. I keep saying this, you cannot cross the border without escalation. Arjun Subramaniam is going to turn around and kill me, but that is the truth. If push comes to shove, you have to, right? But this is the reality. BVR, because you want your strikes in Kargil, you didn't cross the border. In Balakot, you crossed the border, fantastic. Because from time and time again, they're saying this is something you should do. It doesn't matter what you hit. You just didn't play the Pakistanis game. Great stuff. But you didn't expect the Pakistanis to hit back. So there is an inherent escalation with all this Ukraine thing we're talking about in relation to India, is that it's a different thing. Here, it is a question of Air Force. I agree, they don't understand air power, but they do understand politics. So Air Force should think of force multipliers, ISR, everything, and most of all, tell the politicians they need more money. This is what you need. You can't wait for indigenization. Is a fantastic idea. Meanwhile, you need to go out there and buy your stuff. That's all I'd like to say.
Perfect. That's, I think all the three officers would agree with you, especially on the last point. AVM Subramanian sir, the two things that the Air Force should change.
One is I think, over the last decade or so, the Indian Air Force has built up fantastic non-kinetic capability, which means to say it has built up its air transport fleet, it has built up its C-17s. Air power is seen as a significant instrument of statecraft. I think for the next decade, we must concentrate on building offensive capability. Because when you build up offensive capability, then your ability to credibly deter and coerce increases significantly. And if we are going to be a rising power, and if we are going to be a power of consequence in the years ahead, I'm afraid we'll have to be prepared for climbing the escalatory ladder. I will beg to differ with Tara when she says that BVR does not mean that you have to cross the international boundary. I can shoot an enemy aircraft down 50 kilometers inside his own territory, staying 100 kilometers inside my own territory. So my issue is that we must be cognizant of escalation and the consequences of escalation, but we must be prepared to climb the escalation ladder if we are to be a power of consequence. Number one. The second thing that I would like to see with greater vigor is that I would like to see the Indian Air Force being more serious. And here I know I'm in dangerous territory, but I would like to see the Indian Air Force more serious about joint operations.
Yeah.
Right? Air power is excellent as a standalone instrument of warfighting, but in today's context, shorter wars, swifter wars, its major impact is primarily in joint operations. So I think we still have some distance to go in honing up our skills in joint operations, whether it is with the army or whether it is in conjunction with maritime capability.
That's a very interesting point that you've mentioned, and you've, and I will not disagree with you when you say that you've waded into tricky waters when you said that. But that's a really important point. That it's not just the Air Force. I think the Army and the Navy will also have to learn that part. They all have their individual doctrines and they stick by it, but they'll have to learn to come to join together and operate.
Just a minute. I just want to mention one thing. Is that, and here I think Tara will be very happy that I think I spoke. I spoke almost what she spoke about saying together. But till now, much of what we've been doing is joined. Okay, I am really talking about serious joint capability.
Perfect. Air Marshal Chaudhary, the word to you. The two things that you would like to see being changed in the Air Force in context of this war that is on and in context of the future wars that would be fought.
Okay, I think some critical aspects have already been touched upon, so I will obviously not go upon those. But one aspect I would like to bring out very clearly that, like I said, mentioned before earlier, that the IAF has just recently, about a month and a half back probably, it's revised its doctrine. Yeah. And it has a huge amount of jointness in it. From a joint perspective. In fact, there's an air strategy plugs into the military strategy, and it has lateral linkages with the land strategy and the sea strategy, that means of the Army and the Navy. But where the problem has been is in Indian context, and this is something I have stated not just from the military perspective, from a national security perspective, and for every citizen. And that probably is a reason why there is so little awareness or air-mindedness, like you mentioned, air-blindness. I think there's a lack of air-mindedness, not enough airtime by most channels given to air power. So consequently, what has happened is that air power is not really factored into the nation's military strategy. A military strategy is very continental and maritime in its outlook. So this is where the Air Force needs to up its game to be able to articulate and increase the debate and discussions on the future roles that air power will play, whether independently or jointly. So this is something which is something very, very fundamental. It's not just that the Air Force has always been a little poor in sort of selling itself in the past. So that has been one aspect which I would love the Air Force to do much more about, is to convince the nation on the wider applications of air power and its need in the future. That is the first aspect. And the second aspect, I will take a line out of Mao Zedong when he said, quantity has its own quality. We need numbers. We need that MRFA desperately. And that can only happen if people realize how serious a weak Air Force will make this nation militarily and as a nation. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, Air Marshal Chaudhary, that's a very important point. The fact is that we need numbers. Now, we currently for the viewers, we're currently at about 31 squadrons of fighters. The sanction strength is 42. By 2025, there are 3 more squadrons of the MiG-21 Bisons that would be phased out. And that is when the phasing out of the Jaguar begins. Air Marshal Chopra is a Mirage pilot. And by the time that the Jaguars are phased out, that is about 2031. That is when the Mirages and the upgraded MiG-29s start getting phased out. What do we have in between is the fact that the Air Force has ordered for 83 LCA Mark 1As, the deliveries of which are scheduled in 2024. That's supposed to begin. If there are any delays, then the whole plan really goes into toss. The MRFA that he mentioned, that Air Marshal Chaudhary mentioned, he's talking about the medium role fighter aircraft. These were this was brought in after the government, went in for the 36 Rafale fighters instead for the 114 for good reasons. Otherwise that MMRCA deal would have been stuck for long. The government went in for the 36, but the Air Force needs more. And that is something that the Air Force is desperately looking at, because when you look at numbers, it really looks really bad. And when I say 31 squadrons also, viewers, it's important for you to understand that each squadron, fighter squadron, the Air Force has 16 aircraft plus 2. There is 2 trainers. So it's about 18 aircraft. But when you say 31 squadrons, it doesn't mean full, complete 31 squadrons. For example, the MiG-21 Bison squadrons needs to have 18 aircraft per squadron. But there are squadrons which have less than 10 fighters in that particular squadron. Or when you talk about Sukhois, we have 272 of the around 260 of the Sukhois. It doesn't mean that all those Sukhois are available for fighting at the same point of time. The serviceability ratio of the Sukhois are much less. It's less than 50%, which means that if there is a war tomorrow of operation, only 50% of these aircraft are available, the Sukhois. So the Air Force, as Air Marshal Chaudhary rightly mentioned, is desperately in need of numbers. And that is something which we as the country should focus on, the government should also focus on. And I'm sure the government is already focused on that. Last words to you, Air Marshal Chopra, on the 2 things that you would really like to see change in the Air Force.
I'm going to extend to the 2 points which have already been covered, but that's what, I think, because what needs to be changed, the change is taking place, whether they are going to, look at electronic warfare, they're going to look at the drones, the activity is on, and we are daily getting to hear what's going on over there. But I certainly feel these 2 issues. One, how to get the fighter numbers up. MRFA, the day the FR, you send out the request for proposal, it will take 6 years to end up. That still that is a request has not gone out yet, and I don't see it happening this year. It may happen sometime next year. I only hope. But I've been saying that for the last 4 years, that I hope it's going to happen this year. But nothing seems to be happening. LCA production, I must tell you, 12 a year is no good. You yourself said that Mark 1A will finish production only in 2029 if all goes well. We need to produce 24 aircraft, LCAs. 18 aircraft will be produced by HAL. Maybe 1 or 2 lines can be given to the private sector. They're talking of one private sector was to get an 8 aircraft line. You can get numbers. You talked about serviceability. If you increase 2%, 5%, if you increase serviceability of entire Indian Air Force, you add 2 squadrons. That's a huge number. And even if it means me to getting spares worth 20,000 crores, and if some of them will just lie on the shelves and die, I don't care, because those 5% serviceability is 2 full squadrons, adding to the figures. The figures of 230 are perhaps a little higher than what you're saying. It's 60% or so. FRAs and AVACs, I'm telling you, this is a very, very serious area. You cannot be fighting. Today, the proposal that DRDO is going to make these A320s into FRA stroke, AWCs is going to take 7 to 8 years. Time that we take on lease, both these types, there's some loose stock going on, that 1 or the aircraft, they're going to take. One is not good enough. Maybe we take on lease 4 or 6 or whatever, larger numbers of both the types. Because if we are waiting for our Indian FRAs and AWCs, it is going to take a long time. And my last point is about this political executive. Yes, right now everybody is looking at maritime. Everybody is talking of free seas because the Americans are interested. The action is in Indo-Pacific. The world is all talking about maritime. So there is a little attention there. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs the attention. Army is doing firefighting every day. But I must tell you, the largest capital budget continues to be the Indian Air Force. If you see the budget of last 10 years, the biggest percentage chunk of the capital budget still comes to Indian Air Force, because the air power is different, obsolescence sets in early, and therefore more and more chunks will come. But I agree with Tara, we need more money. And show me the money, I want to see it on the table. And that is the only way for us to be able to make good our numbers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, the Print family, for joining in this discussion. There were a lot of questions. I tried to cover as much as possible. I couldn't really take individual names, but thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much for subscribing to The Print. As Praveen earlier said, that journalism, to do good journalism, and we here at the Print, we hope to do good journalism, and we work towards good journalism. There are times, we do stories that the people in the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy really get upset about. But then that's the job of us as a journalist, and for us to sustain and go ahead, we need members like you to subscribe to the Print. I would really urge you to go out to your friends, to your relatives, family, and tell them about the Print, and tell them about the work that we do, and subscribe to the Print, support us. And thank you so much, Air Marshal Chaudhary, Tara Karta, AVM Subramaniam Sir, and of course Air Marshal Chopra, for being here with us, for taking us through this important discussion. And I completely agree with all of you when we say that there needs to be the nation needs to understand air power in a better way. Forget the better way, at least needs to understand the basics of air power, the importance of air power. And that is the exact reason why we decided to talk about the Indian Air Force rather than the Army, the Navy, or anything in our first session. But thank you so much, sir, and ma'am, for logging in and for being with us on this particular discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, dear panelists and good friends. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Snehesh, and see you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.